Welcome to the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador COVID-19 briefing for Wednesday, August 26th, and thank you all for joining us. I'm honored to be here next to the Province Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Janice Fitzgerald, a hero to my family and to many of you at home, who we all know has been absolutely incredible in her tireless work to promote the best practices to keep Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as safe as possible from COVID-19. Our success and the low prevalence that we all enjoy today is largely thanks to the work of Dr. Fitzgerald and her entire team. Thank you. Thank you, of course, to Premier Dwight Ball for his leadership throughout this pandemic, and Health Minister John Haggie, who is home recovering from a medical procedure, and I'm happy to report I've talked to him almost every day or texted with him, and he's itching to get back at it, and I'm itching to have him here as well. On that note, we have a new face here today. Thanks to Minister Osborne for joining us to share an important announcement about the safe return to schools. The Minister has been flat out since tackling his new department, and I'm sure he's not going to stop anytime soon. Making sure our children, teachers, and staff are safe as we return to a new normal for schools is paramount to our government and to the people of this province. To everyone else across the province, thank you for joining today and for working tirelessly yourselves, pulling together during this tough, difficult time to ensure our communities are safe. You've shown respect for the medical evidence and a shared commitment to keeping yourselves and each other healthy. And frankly, to the media, thank you for all your hard work and dedication to sharing this important, critical information with Newfoundlanders and Labradorians so that we all can act together to keep our place safe. I'll turn it now over to Dr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for joining us today. So we'll start with an update. Since the media advisory yesterday, we have no new cases, and the total number in the province remains at 268. 265 people have now recovered, so we have no active cases in the province. In total, we have tested 30,807 people. Today marks another day with no new cases, and this week we relaxed some of our public health measures related to formal gatherings. This was another step in our journey towards living with COVID-19, a step that we were able to make in part due to everyone's collective efforts. We have been doing exceptionally well in adhering to our public health measures and keeping our case count low in this province. We should all be proud of the steps we've taken to keep each other safe from this virus. As we look across the country, it is a reminder of the role that informal gatherings can play in spreading this virus. So as we prepare to move into September, this is a time when families are soaking up the last few weeks of summer and will be spending time together before the new school year begins. As you are planning your remaining summer activities, I want to remind you of the duty that we all share to keep each other safe and healthy. If you are planning any informal gatherings, such as barbecues or backyard activities, keeping a record of all persons in attendance for 2 weeks following the gathering helps public health if contact tracing is needed. Relying on memory only can be tricky, particularly as life gets busier. Before our kids head back to classes, whether you are planning or attending an informal gathering, please also keep in mind our mantra of people, space, time, and place. Use it to help guide your activities and consider using the phrase as a teachable moment with your children. It will help support them as they navigate their surroundings and their activities as they head back in September. As of Monday, August 24th, masks are also now mandatory in public spaces, and this is another public health measure that, when paired with frequent hand washing or use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers and physical distancing, will help us reduce the spread of the virus and keep our communities safe. There have been questions with regard to exemptions for mask usage, and these are outlined in the guidance on the website at gov.nl.ca/COVID-19. And while we will not require documentation of such an exemption, there are few conditions which will be negatively impacted by wearing a mask. The Canadian Thoracic Society supports the use of masks in those with respiratory disease as well. I understand that for some, masks can evoke feelings of anxiety, which is why normalizing mask wearing will help support us all, but particularly our children and youth. Children will model behaviors that will take our lead, help them to understand why we are taking these measures and how it will help keep us healthy and safe. I have seen many clever and creative examples of masks being used as a form of self-expression from all ages, and this has been wonderful to see. As always, please stay home if you feel unwell, cover your coughs and sneezes, practice good hand hygiene, and maintain a safe physical distance of 2 arms lengths from others. Today, I'm announcing some relaxation of the travel restrictions we have had in place since May 4th. Effective Monday, August 31st, people who own cabins and second homes in Newfoundland and Labrador will be able to enter the province. These owners will have to apply for a travel exemption, and the 14-day self-isolation requirements will still be in place. Proof of home ownership in Newfoundland and Labrador will be required with the application. When we introduced these measures, the epidemiology in the rest of Canada was different than what it is now, and we have learned much about effective mitigation measures to keep our vulnerable populations safe. We have worked hard to strengthen our acute care and public health capacity and personal protective equipment supplies. It is safe to now allow these travelers at this time. We have heard the voices of rotational workers who are struggling with the self-isolation requirement. We all need to remember that these workers and their families have endured hardship and have sacrificed much over the past 6 months to provide for their families and to keep our province safe while doing so. I want these workers to know that we hear you, and we have been diligently working to find a way to safely and significantly reduce these restrictions, and we'll have more information in the coming days. As a recap for those who may have just joined us, we have no new cases since yesterday's media advisory, and the total number of cases in the province remains at 268. We have a common goal. We have been diligent, and we have made significant progress to contain COVID-19. Together, we'll continue to keep our communities safe. Thank you, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald. I'd like to now welcome Minister Osborne to share some other important news.
Thank you, Premier. I am pleased to be joined by Premier Furey and Dr. Fitzgerald today and to provide an update to parents, students, teachers, and all school staff on preparations for the return to school this year. The first order of business following my swearing in as Minister of Education 1 week ago today was to reach out to representatives from all sectors in the education system and to my colleagues in the House of Assembly to work together to resolve some of the concerns that we see as we move towards the reopening of school. Since Thursday, we've had several meetings, many discussions, lots of listening, and a healthy exchange of ideas and potential solutions. We are working together to ensure the return to school is safe and that students can once again enjoy the benefit from the normalcy and structure of school, the relationships they have with friends and teachers, and the face-to-face instruction. There has been a tremendous amount of work done at the school districts on planning for September, and I want to acknowledge the chairs and directors and all of their staff for their focus and their efforts these past several months in preparing for the new school year ahead. As the pandemic has evolved since March, and quite frankly will continue to evolve, the planning and preparations must also evolve. The school district's plans are living documents and will adapt and change as needed throughout the school year. Following initial meetings last week with stakeholders, we announced that 70 substitute teachers will be hired on term contracts and will be assigned to schools. This will ensure that there are teaching resources and support when teachers may be on leave. It will also help alleviate the burden on school administrators of having to call in substitutes when needed, as they'll already be placed at that school. We have heard about the need for additional support for cleaning and sanitizing in our schools. For current custodians, the hours of work each day will be increased from 5 to 7 hours, and the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District will be hiring up to 25 additional casual custodians on a temporary full-time basis. Under the leadership of Premier Furey, our conversations and exchange of ideas this week with the school districts, the NLTA, CUPE, NAPE, the Federation of School Councils, and members of the House of Assembly have also been fruitful. I want to thank Mr. Dinh, Mr. Pardee, and Mr. Lane for agreeing to put politics aside and work collaboratively. School administrators, our principals, are on the front lines of our school system. We recognize the critical role they play in reopening of schools. Today, myself and the Premier are pleased to announce that we are increasing the allocation of administrators by 15 positions. This will restore it to the level recommended by the Teacher Allocation Commission led by Brian Shortall in 2008. It also reverses the decrease in that allocation that was made in 2013. The NLTA, administrators, and many others have been calling for this change for a number of years. I want to thank them for their input and the many conversations we've had on this topic. Likewise, we are announcing an increase to the allocation of guidance counselors. We recognize that children may experience increased stress and anxiety related to COVID as they return to school, and the potential need for additional guidance supports. We are providing an additional 25 positions, which will also meet the 2008 recommendation of the Teacher Allocation Commission. For the past number of years, the recommendations of the Shortall report have never been met. With these changes today, we will now meet those recommendations. This year, more than any other, the resources we've previously announced, along with the increasing allocations today, are critical because of the COVID-19 pandemic. These additional positions will be funded under the federal government support package announced today for the reopening of schools. Newfoundland and Labrador will receive $26.1 million. This includes $13 million, which will be received upfront, and $13 million to be provided following a report on how the first $13 million was spent. We are advised that we will have flexibility to spend funding according to our own education priorities. This may include such areas as adaptation of learning spaces, improving air systems in schools, increased hand sanitization, hygiene, and testing, additional cleaning supplies for frequent cleaning and disinfection, PPE, support for remote learning, health and safety training. In anticipation of this funding, much of this work has started. Training in occupational health and safety is an important aspect to a successful and safe return to the classroom. This is an issue raised by both NAPE and CUPE. Additional training is being provided for all custodial staff, substitute teachers, and student assistants, including those on the call-in list. This training has already started in some instances. It is ongoing, and in other instances will start. Training will be provided before students return to school. For all of those working in our schools, the district has a robust supply of personal protective equipment. The district facility staff will be assessing schools to ensure safeguards are put in place in high-traffic areas. I know that some parents are wondering about learning plans for students who have traveled and must self-isolate, or for those students who are immunocompromised and may have to stay at home based on medical advice for a period of time. There have always been instances where students have been unable to attend school due to medical reasons. During a normal school year, when a student is ill for an extended period or has an infectious disease, for example, schools work with students and families to develop learning plans unique to the student's needs. It is sometimes referred to as a continuity of learning plan. In such instances, if a student is sick, their capacity for learning may be different than if they are just self-isolating. Typically, teachers look at work that can be achieved at home, given the strengths of the student and the parts of curriculum already achieved. The districts will have a continuity of learning plan for students who are required to stay at home for these reasons. There has been considerable discussion on the topic of busing and how we can lessen the impact on students and families. This is an area that we are still working through with the department, the school district, and my colleagues in the House. NAEP, CUPE, the Federation of School Councils, and others are exploring options. I believe that we will be able to find a solution to reduce the number of students who have been impacted. I cannot say at this point how many students, but we are working towards solutions. There have been concerns raised as well by busing contractors about the burden of having to purchase supplies to clean and sanitize buses. I can assure contractors today that the school districts will now provide the supplies required for cleaning. This will ensure a consistent and reliable source of cleaning supplies and remove that burden from the busing companies. We are also having discussions about allowing parents to accompany kindergarten students into classrooms. I completely understand why parents are asking for this change. The first day of school is one of life's early milestones, and one you want to be there not only to witness that important first step, but also to provide encouragement and comfort. We continue to look at options, and I hope to have an update soon that will allow parent involvement while respecting the guidance of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. We've had discussions regarding masks over the past number of days, and in all of our discussion, there has been a lot of feedback and comment on the current guidelines on masks in the school setting. Some are in favor of students not having to wear masks, while others are in favor of all students of all ages wearing masks at all times, whether it be on the bus or in the school. We continue to engage Dr. Fitzgerald and will follow the guidance of our public health officials on this important matter. And let's not lose sight of an important part of this debate. Where we are is in very large part due to the guidance and advice of Dr. Fitzgerald and our public health officials. Thanks to her guidance, we have a very low prevalence of COVID-19 and no community transmission at this time. We all have a role to play in ensuring our students can remain in school by continuing to practice prevention measures and following the advice of public health. By continuing on this path, we will help keep the prevalence and community transmission low, which in turn will help keep our children in school. We have had tremendous success in our province in containing the pandemic. Our healthcare system adapted to the reality of COVID-19, and our education system will adapt as well. I intend to continue to collaborate, to hold discussions with all stakeholders on planning for the start of the school year, as well as those discussions as we move through the school year and this evolving situation. I want to thank the school districts, the Federation of School Councils, the NLTA, NAEP, CUPE, Mr. Dinn, Mr. Pardy, and Mr. Lane, and of course, Dr. Fitzgerald and the Premier for coming to the table and their input this past week. These discussions will continue on a regular basis as long as they are needed. As I mentioned, the plan for the return to school is a living document, and we will update and adapt as needed over the coming weeks and no doubt the coming months. That said, I encourage everyone to read the information that is available. This includes the district's plans and the public health guidance for K-12 schools. These are detailed documents that will likely have most of the answers to the questions you have. All materials are available online at gov.nl.ca gov.nl.ca/EECD/NL Safe Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I believe now, being this my first one, we open it up to questions.
Thank you, Premier. For the benefit of our speakers, we have 5 reporters registered for today's call. Each reporter will have the opportunity to ask 2 questions and 1 follow-up. We suggest that you not ask rumor-based questions. The purpose of these briefings is to address COVID-19 issues. All other government-related issues should be directed to the appropriate department or agency for response. Reporters will ask questions in the order they registered for today's call. Our first questions are from Kellyanne Roberts of NTV News. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Minister Osborne, with this new money allocation, we're seeing the $13 million up front and then $13 million later on, depending on how the first $13 million are spent. You've added more resources, but we're still fielding a lot of questions about student assistance. Are we looking to add more based on the back-to-school plan?
That is a discussion that continues. We've had significant discussion about student assistance and the need as we move through COVID, perhaps for additional resources. So yes, we are discussing that issue and will continue to discuss that over the coming days.
Thank you. And I guess a further question on that $13 million. Why is it being broken up the way it is in terms of the $13 million up front and then $13 million later on? And what are those plans for that first $13 million?
Well, the first $13 million, and it's a question perhaps better answered by the federal government, but the first $13 million is being provided. Once we provide a status update on how that has been spent, the second $13 million will be provided.
Thank you. And Dr. Janice Fitzgerald, you had mentioned you hear the rotational workers, you hear their pleas in terms of their self-isolation, and you're working on this. You say there's more coming. Is there a timeline on when we can expect more of that information?
So I hope it will be very soon, but I don't want to promise a timeline, but I'm hoping fairly quickly, yeah, in the coming days.
Thank you. Thanks.
Our next questions are from Brian Medore of VOCM News. Please go ahead.
There have been suggestions that perhaps there should be some kind of system whereby there are temperature checks for people visiting our schools. I think the opposition raised that. Any thoughts on that? Is that out there? Is that possible?
We're certainly not entertaining that. From a public health point of view, it hasn't been shown to be effective as a screening tool. And certainly symptom screening is more effective. And that's what we'll be going with for any visitors to the school.
And a question for Dr. Fitzgerald regarding the situation downtown Thursday night. A lot of people pretty exasperated at what they saw, wondering, was there enforcement? Were there tickets issued? Will there be tickets issued? Can you speak to that, or is that outside your domain?
Yes, so we weren't aware that we weren't engaged in that process, and I think it was something that happened organically. But with regard to the enforcement, I don't have that information, but we can certainly try to get that for you.
Thank you.
Our next questions are from Peter Cowan of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Minister Osborne, we heard from your predecessor that when it came to busing, there are simply no new buses available. They're already doing double runs, so there wasn't any way to be able to try and increase increase the capacity. So it sounded pretty definite when he said it. How are you able to try and reduce the number of people who aren't going to be able to be bused?
I can't speak to the advice that was provided to the previous minister. What I can speak to is the advice that I've been given, the conversations that I've had with the Premier. I know the Premier has been reaching out to contacts. I've been reaching out to contacts to find additional resources in terms of buses. I know the English School District has been looking at this and departmental officials. It's a combined effort. There's been a number of discussions about busing raised at the discussions that we've had with stakeholders, including members of the House of Assembly. It is something that we are working on and working towards reducing the number of students that have been impacted to ensure that we can accommodate as many as possible.
Question about the rotational workers for perhaps the Premier as well as Dr. Fitzgerald. We're seeing other provinces have implemented plans. New Brunswick, for example, no longer requires isolation. PEI has a testing regime. Why haven't we been able to implement something like that in order to help these groups?
So we're looking at those very questions right now, and certainly we're trying to figure out how we can do that safely and effectively in a way that looks at the health and safety of the population and also the health and safety of these workers.
Premier, are you able to address that?
Sure. I mean, we have, as we've seen this virus evolve and the public health advice evolve, both here in the province and across the Atlantic region. Of course, we're working with Dr. Fitzgerald and her full team to ensure that we're making the best decision with the best evidence available, and I think that we'll arrive at something that will help this critical mass and this critical population, not only for them, but also for ensuring that we're able to keep the economy humming.
And a question for Minister Osborne around the new allocations for administrators as well as guidance counselors. Are these just going to be temporary for this year, or are they going to be permanent, as was recommended by the report?
I know that the funding provided by the federal government is one-time funding, so that will obviously look after the requirement for this year and in this year's budget. These everything, regardless of what it is always reviewed on a budget-by-budget basis, and this will be no different.
Thank you.
Our next questions are from Dave Marr of The Telegram. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Minister Osborne, you mentioned that we're talking about the $26 million that's allocated, but we only have $13 million so far. Are all of the allocations that you announced today just coming from that first $13 million, or can we expect a second announcement to discuss the second $13 million?
Well, the funding that's been provided is to assist for this fiscal year, obviously, in anticipation that that the federal government will see that we've spent the money wisely and we will get the second $13 million. I don't anticipate that being a problem. We are focused on the safe return of students to school and putting measures in place to ensure that the school year can continue for the social, emotional, and mental health well-being of students, as well as their academic well-being. It's important that students are back in school. We've heard that from the vast majority of parents that we've heard from. I know that out of this, we've already used millions of it in busing requirements, the changes to busing, in cleaning and disinfecting supplies, as well as what we've announced last week and today in terms of new resources. So we will be very cautious in how we use this funding, but if a teacher allocation through the administration increases or through the guidance increases that we've talked about today, that's on an annual basis. Those costs will run not just between now and December when the funding is up for review again, but beyond that.
Thank you. And on the substitutes that were announced, can you speak to just how exactly they will be distributed around the school system? Will it be based on school population? Will it be based on need? How exactly will that work in terms of distribution?
That is something that the English School District will have a large guidance in how that is distributed. That's not something that gets down to the micro level of a minister deciding where those allocations go.
Okay, thank you. And so, we're seeing lots of supports that, support teachers in the classroom and of course students as well. But are there any discussions ongoing right now about adding to the contingent of teachers in the province?
Those discussions have taken place, and we will operate with the advice of the school districts as well as departmental officials. I will say that NLTA has been at the table, and we've had discussions with them. I spoke with them every day this week and every day last week since I was appointed minister. So I know that they're aware of the increased allocations that were provided in today's announcement, and it's my understanding that that they're pleased with those allocations.
Thank you.
Our next questions are from Holly McKenzie-Suter of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
I think that question's for you, Tom.
It's an easy one.
I think Holly may have disconnected from the call, so we're going to go back to Kelly Ann Roberts of NTD News. You'll have 2 more questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In looking at, in terms of the rotational workers and now letting seasonal homeowners apply, can we just dive a bit deeper into the seasonal homeowner? So they'll still have to apply for an exemption, but what do they need to provide so that we'll know that they are a seasonal homeowner to enter the province?
So they'll have to provide proof that they own a home here in Newfoundland and Labrador, so that it could be, a proof of property tax or some sort of thing. There will be instructions as to what exactly they need to, provide on the website.
Great, thank you. And in looking at this, we're seeing, you're looking into rotational workers and how to provide them, I guess, more quality of life when they're at home in terms of leaving their property and further alleviation of restrictions. The seasonal homeowners, is there any further discussions happening with the Canadian travel bubble?
To the best of my knowledge at this point, I don't think there's any discussions, but I have to defer that.
Premier Furey?
Oh, right now, at this point, we're getting up to speed on the Atlantic bubble, making sure that we're safe, and we'll base those, as I understand it, we'll base those decisions collectively on the public health advice and the epidemiology and risk factors as they exist across the country. And we're seeing different outbreaks, of course, across different provinces right now, and we're looking at trends, not just at daily updates, but at trends as they occur across the province and in individual provinces, across the country and in individual provinces. And I'm sure Dr. Fitzgerald and her team will evaluate those and weigh those variables in making a recommendation with respect to that question.
Thank you.
Our next questions are from Brian Medore of the OCM News. Please go ahead.
Further on the travel restrictions, just some clarification now, how that would affect, say, people from Blanc-Sablon. Quite a few of them do have property in Newfoundland, would like to be there, haven't been able to do so. They would be allowed to apply for an exemption, but if they're in Blanc-Sablon but don't have property, they would not be allowed in? Correct.
So certainly property owners, they would be able to apply in that in the same way, and anyone from Blanc-Sablon can apply for a travel exemption for any reason that they want to apply for, and then to see if that will get approved. And certainly there is movement between Blanc-Sablon and Labrador at the moment without any restriction in isolation.
Minister Osborne, your predecessor a few months ago announced $20 million in technology equipment. Can you give us an update on that? Where does that stand right now? Do we have the equipment, the laptop?
No, it is my understanding that we are waiting on that equipment to arrive. Considering that it's a very large order to be placed, I understand, especially coinciding with the pandemic and perhaps restrictions on manufacturing. So the order was obviously hoped to be here for September. The latest update that I've received is, the order will be here at some point this fall. The primary purpose for the Chromebooks and other technology was really to allow for in-home schooling should the scenarios change from scenario 1 to 2 or 3. However, once those arrive, they will be in the hands of students and will be utilized even within class training.
Thanks.
Our next question is for Peter Cowan of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister Osborne. It looks like today you've addressed quite a few of the concerns that we've heard about the back-to-school education plan. The one thing I didn't hear any discussion of was class sizes and physical distancing. Are you looking at ways to be able to either reduce class sizes or increase physical distancing?
I know we've heard from some administrators that they are looking at larger spaces within schools to accommodate their larger classrooms. Let's keep in mind that currently we have no cases in the province. There's no community spread in this province. And again, I thank our public health officials and Dr. Fitzgerald for guidance. We are one of the jurisdictions in Canada that has performed exceptionally well, and certainly globally that has performed exceptionally well. But in terms of physical distancing, I will defer to Dr. Fitzgerald on the 2 meter versus, I understand from the English School District and the department that in many cases, in classrooms, children will be approximately a meter or more in many cases away from each other. So perhaps Dr. Fitzgerald can talk to the difference in the 1 or 2 meter distancing.
Yes, thanks. So we know that, and certainly we've been talking about 2 meter distancing. Within cohorts, certainly the evidence, some new evidence that's evolving is showing that the difference between 1 meter and 2 meter with regard to reducing spread there is a small difference, but it is quite small. So if you're spaced by 2 meters, you can reduce spread by 80%. By 1 meter, you can reduce by 80%, and if you distance by 2 meters, it's 90%. So there's a small difference in that, and certainly some of the modeling information that we've had related to distancing in classrooms has shown that as well. We recommend, of course, physical distancing to the greatest extent possible, but we are also looking at the overall well-being of the children and trying to make sure that they get back to as normal a situation as possible. And given our epidemiology and the fact that we have zero prevalence at this time, I think we're certainly in a position where we can make that recommendation.
I want to ask about masks because we've now had the first couple of days where people have had to wear them inside in public places. Dr. Fitzgerald, what's your assessment? How well have people been doing at following these guidelines?
So certainly, I haven't had much experience outside of work and home, to be honest with you, in the last few days. But from what I've seen at work here, people have been quite compliant with wearing masks. And from everything I hear, there doesn't seem to be a huge reluctance for people to wear them. So I've been very pleased to hear that. And I think, as I've said before, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have been very good at following the guidelines, and we've done exceptionally well, and I don't think masks will be any different.
Thank you.
Our next questions are from David Marr of the Telegram. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Fitzgerald, on the lifting of the travel exemptions there for cabin owners and whatnot, I'm wondering, do you have any sort of estimate as to just how many more people might come into the province with that restriction eased?
It's difficult to say who might apply, who hasn't applied before. Certainly, we have had approximately 3,000 people that have applied that have not been granted an exemption. We don't expect that all of those people will reapply, as many of them were coming for the summer months, but there will likely be a portion of those that will apply. But I don't know that I can predict exactly how many at this point.
Thank you. And the people who will be able to come in, I'm assuming that's kind of universal, like wherever they are in the world, they'll be able to come in. We see the situation that's unfolding in the United States. Will Americans be able to come on in?
No, this will apply to Canadians who reside in Canada who have a home in Newfoundland, a second home in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you very much.
We still have a few minutes left, so I'm going to see if each reporter has any further questions. We'll start with Kellyanne Roberts of NTV News. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Premier Furey, this is your first COVID-19 briefing, a week since being sworn in as Premier. What is your sense of the all-party committee and where the province currently stands in terms of the battle against COVID-19?
Well, I think we're in a great position, emerging as we're actively in this crisis. Again, full credit to Dr. Fitzgerald and her team for doing an absolutely incredible job. But I think the entire province operates as a collective in this, and every single person at home deserves equal credit in ensuring that and making and frankly creating this opportunity to be able to say that we have a zero prevalence. And I mean, when we reflect on that, there's no prevalence here, and so I think when we're making judgments moving forward, and as you've heard me say before, there is no, pre-COVID and post-COVID world. There's only now a COVID world, and we need to figure out a way to safely navigate that COVID world. And I think we're using the best of evidence available to us with the guidance of Dr. Fitzgerald to ensure that we're developing and adapting as best we can in these troubling times. And I've been very encouraged in the last week to see all the hard work that's being performed at the Department of Health and the Department of Education to ensure that we continue with that goal, to have a safe environment that we can redefine businesses and open and redefine our school system and education system to provide the opportunities that lie ahead.
Our next question.
Thank you.
Our next question, Brian Medore of VOCM News. Please go ahead.
Dr. Fitzgerald, just regarding testing capacity, usually 2-3 weeks, I know in my little girl's situation anyway the last few years, out comes sniffles and the cost just 2 or 3 weeks after school starts. Chances are you're going to have an increased demand for testing because of that return to school. Where do we sit in that regard, testing capacity? Do you have to make any changes to meet what probably would be increased demand?
We're in a good place with regard to testing capacity. We certainly, I think, will be able to perform what we need to do in that if we get into that situation. So we have to remember a few things, that all these diseases that we see when the school restarts generally are spread in exactly the same way COVID is. So all of these measures that we're putting in to protect against COVID spread will also help to protect against the spread of these diseases as well. So I think that, I'm holding out hope that we're not going to see as high a level of those diseases as we normally would. However, should we start to see some of these other respiratory viruses circulating, we certainly do have the capacity to be able to test for those. And on that note, I will say that the best protection against influenza is still to get your flu shot, and we really want to make sure that we get everybody out to get their flu shot this year. We're aiming for 80% of the population to be vaccinated. This will help not only protect us against influenza, but it will also help to protect our healthcare system and to protect our capacity in the healthcare system should we see a surge in COVID. So very important for people to try to get out and get their flu shot this year.
Thanks.
Next, we have Peter Cowan of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Fitzgerald, a question about now allowing seasonal residents into the province. What's changed to allow us to make this change now compared to, say, a month ago?
So we've been watching things, and a month ago, you're right, we did see a decrease in spread throughout the country, and across the country we were in a good place. But then we started to see little upticks, and so we were a bit concerned about that, and we weren't quite sure where that was going to go. But certainly what we've seen over the past month has been that, these little small upticks have gone up, but then they've come under control, and we've seen this little ripple of cases across the country. And I think that's how it's going to go, and certainly that's our aim for what's going to happen, is that we'll see a few cases here and there, and we'll see these small ripples elsewhere. So, we feel confident that that's holding at this point. Of course, we're always watching the epidemiology here and elsewhere, and if that changes, then we can change too.
Thank you.
And our final question today is David Marr of the Telegram. Please go ahead.
Thank you again. Minister Osborne, on the federal funding, once again, that's announced, I'm assuming that was allocated on a per capita basis for this province. But I'm wondering, does the province have any other levers to pull in terms of, getting more funding in place should that $26 million prove not to be enough?
I know that, we've been working in my previous role with the federal government on funding in a number of areas. I can say that the Premier has a very solid relationship with the federal government, and I believe that will hold this province in good stead as we move forward.
Thank you very much. The time for questions has ended. Premier Furey, do you have any closing remarks today?
Sure. I'd just like to thank you all for joining today. Thanks to the media for some good questions. I'd also like to take this opportunity once again to thank Dr. Fitzgerald and her team, but also to thank the stakeholder committee that we've managed to strike within the last week, and we've already met a couple of times. I hear the concerns through them, whether it's parents groups or the NLTA, and I think we can all agree that we're all working together with a common goal to get our children back to a safe environment to advance their education and opportunities for them in the future. And the final thing I will say is, and it will echo, of course, Dr. Fitzgerald, no surprise, is please, I'm going to put on my doctor hat here now, please get your flu shot this season. It will help immensely in creating space and opportunity for us to continue to fight COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. And for those tuning in, please join us again on Wednesday, September 2nd at 2 p.m., 1:30 in most of Labrador. Have a great evening, everyone.